Sunni to Shias?
Country to country, even different Sunni countries have different,
Yeah.
and different Shia countries have different interpretations.
Just wondering, thinking of analogically, Bill, which of Niebuhr's 5 types do you think Islamic finance is closest to? And Karen, would you agree with Bill?
Well, I tend to think it's somewhere in that third, whether it's above or whatever. I think there's some kind of dialectic going on there, at least the bit of reading that I've done in this area and listening to others. I think you have an honest struggle trying to maintain a fidelity to an ideal. See, for Niebuhr, what he had is the ideal love. See, and every principle of justice approximated, but also contradicted, because you never quite met it. And it's even more of a contradiction with institutions. They never. And so you could think of the banking. You see, you have you'd have to lay these out, but you start with the 5 pillars or whatever. The most fundamental thing with Hugonics, and then you're trying to attain as close an approximation to that as possible. That may be one way to look at it. So I think it could probably fit in the third. What complicates it, I think, for me, is that the question of whole integrated Islamic cultures, which may be different from the very diverse. I would say that as I thought about this, in Islam, there are probably those same different types going on.
Yeah.
Let me give one example. Some of you may have heard of Tariq Ramadan. Several years ago, he's an Islamic scholar who several years ago was supposed to come to the University of Notre Dame. And people said, no, he can't come because he contributed some money to an organization that had links to terrorism and so on. And Notre Dame fought to get him to come, but they didn't let him come. But he's one person who, in a sense, talked about kind of an American Islamist Islam. It's quite easy to integrate, and he got resistance from others within the Muslim community. No, you don't want to go down that road. It's too much accommodation. So I tend to think that you would find not exactly the same, but some kind of similar models, types in Islam. Also for Niebuhr, I think you have to remember that he's talking about ideal types. You're not going to find these in any pure form. But I think there's enough, in a sense, commonality and diversity that it might be worth exploring further. Jeff's kind of question.
Yeah, I would just like to say I would agree it's the paradoxical, the dialectical relationship. Perhaps it didn't start out that way, in the sense that there was the sort of early rhetoric in Islamic economics was there's this conventional economic system out there, and it's good. It's a good base and everything, but society, we as humans have let ourselves disintegrate, in terms of how we treat each other and ethically. So I think it started out by saying Islamic economics is here to keep the good things from that system and throw out the bad. So I think it started out that way, and now it's evolved into more of a dialectical. I think especially as some of the practical considerations have come into play.
Just 1 second. It's past 8 o'clock, so if anybody needs to leave, we are going to be here, because this is phenomenal, but if you want to leave.
I just wanted to say something about, I was just doing zakat today in class, and the whole notion of income tax, and a portion of your wealth, your earnings, and how significant theoretically it is in Islam. That the haves must, by religious obligation, take care of the have-nots. I know we talked about this in another setting, but I was trying to share with the students how the 99% and the 1%, that what if we had a system where we freely gave, because those people have a right to what we have. You know, it's just such a different world. And we can learn so much from each other in terms of how to negotiate these sort of clearly social problems that have, you know, business dimensions to them. And it seems to me that what you said, Bill, that this dialogue back and forth can be really mutually enlightening for certainly for the Muslim and the Christian business practices generally.
Yeah. And I just should say, you know, in terms of casuistry, that Judaism, of course, has a long tradition of rabbinic reasoning and so on. That certainly, and I'm sure there's analogs in other traditions.
And I mentioned that when you're bringing in your crop, leave some for the stranger. You know, that all that.
Well, actually, maybe one quick comment, because I don't want to keep us any longer than we are. But when Jeff asked his question, I was expecting to hear the paradoxical relationship, and I don't know whether to be hopeful or despairing, in the sense that to me that paradoxical relationship is a two-edged sword, because in one sense it can be anecdotal or accidental, and things can evolve in multiple unintentional ways, and in another sense it could be an intentional opportunity to explore. And I don't know that we can resolve either of those, but I think that's an edge that cuts both ways.
I think it is. Also, I think that's where some kind of authenticity is called for. For one thing, is a prime example for Niebuhr of the Christian tradition of this paradoxical is Luther. See, you have law and you have gospel. You have, for Luther, people are simul justus et peccator. They're once kind of sanctified and sinners. But as my mentor, James Gustafson, would say, well, it makes a big difference if they're simul justus et peccator. Simul justus et peccator. So where are you putting the emphasis? The other thing is, some people have a great deal of problem with paradox. John Courtney Murray is a famous Jesuit theologian who in some ways was behind John F. Kennedy's speech and so on. I think he was actually in conversation with Kennedy saying this is okay. He was a big promoter of religious freedom and so on. We hold these truths. He goes after Niebuhr and talks about this paradox. The patient is once thriving and losing blood. You know, I can't remember his example, but he doesn't buy this paradox thing. So one question is whether or not some of these different models are incompatible with one another, and then what do you do?
Thank you all.
One last comment.